Breaking news. Ukraine's long-range drones hit Russian refinery. It is Thursday, February 12, 2026. If you believe in freedom, justice, and the right of a sovereign nation to defend itself against aggression, then you need to stay informed. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. Join me in the latest program by Defense Report for the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today we're going to cover.
Well, it's a massive shift in the geography of this war. We are talking about the strike on the Lukoil Ukhta refinery, deep inside the Komomi Republic. Now, before we get into the nuts and bolts, I want to set the stage here. This isn't just another headline about a drone hitting a tank. We've seen thousands of those. This is about a fundamental change in the geometry of the battlefield. We're talking about a strike that effectively erases the concept of a safe rear area for Russia. Today, we're going to deep dive into how Ukraine has stretched the front line by nearly 2,000 kilometers, the specific technology that lets a drone navigate a blizzard without GPS, and what this actually means for the endgame.
It really is a paradigm shift. And, we use that phrase a lot in defense circles, but this time it absolutely fits. When you look at the map, the distance to Ukhta is just staggering. We are talking about a target that is roughly 1,700 to 2,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border.
Let's just pause on that number for a second. 2,000 kilometers. Can you contextualize that for us? If I'm standing in London, where does that get me?
That gets you past Rome, deep into Eastern Europe. Or if you're in the U.S., that's like flying from New York to Miami. It's a truly transcontinental distance. For the first few years of this war, a target that far away was effectively on another planet. The Russians considered the Komi Republic, which is subarctic, by the way, to be completely untouchable.
Right, so the people living there probably felt like the war was just something they watched on TV, happening in a different country.
Exactly that. Until August 10th, 2025. That was the initial strike that really kicked off this whole campaign, leading us to where we are today in February 2026. On that Sunday afternoon, the war arrived in the tundra. Fixed-wing drones just appeared over the city of Ukhta. And they didn't just hit a perimeter fence. They targeted the Lukoil Ukhta refinery.
Okay, so they hit a refinery. We've seen refinery strikes before, right? Rostov, Krasnodar, those are all much closer to the border. What makes this Ukhta strike so different, other than the sheer mileage?
It's what they hit inside the refinery. See, early in the war and even into last year, we saw a lot of strikes on the big fuel storage tanks. You remember those videos? Huge black plumes of smoke, these spectacular fireballs. They look great on Telegram.
They're very cinematic.
They are, but militarily, they're a nuisance, really. A storage tank is just a big steel bucket. You can patch it, or you can just route the oil around it. The refinery itself keeps humming. But in Ukhta and in this whole campaign through late 2025, the targeting logic completely changed. They stopped hunting for fireballs and started hunting for single points of failure.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning they hit the gas and gas condensate processing plant. Specifically, they targeted the AVTs, the atmospheric and vacuum distillation units.
Okay, hold on. AVT. Break that down for us without getting too bogged down in chemical engineering. Why is that the kill shot for a refinery?
Think of the AVT as the heart of the refinery. Crude oil comes in, and it has to be heated and separated into all its different parts, diesel, gasoline, kerosene, based on their boiling points. That happens inside these massive, incredibly complex distillation columns. So if you blow up a storage tank, you lose some inventory. But if you blow up the AVT, the crude oil cannot be processed. The entire factory just stops, period.
And I'm guessing you can't just buy a spare AVT at the local hardware store.
That's the kicker. These are massive, custom-built industrial components. And historically, Russia imported the most critical parts, the pumps, the valves, the control systems, from the West. We're talking Siemens, Halliburton, Honeywell. And now, because of sanctions, they can't just call those companies up for repairs.
So a repair that might have taken, what, a few weeks?
Now it takes 6 months, a year maybe, or they have to try to reverse engineer parts using Chinese knockoffs, which, often aren't rated for the extreme pressures and temperatures involved. It turns a single tactical strike into a long-term economic disaster.
That would explain the panic we heard about.
Yeah.
I mean, there were reports of total communication blackouts right after the strike.
Not a total blackout. The Russian authorities immediately cut all mobile internet in Ukhta and the regional capital, Syktyvkar.
Is that just to stop people from uploading embarrassing videos of the smoke?
Well, that's part of it, controlling the narrative. But it's also operational security. They suspect some of the Ukrainian drones might use cellular networks for terminal guidance or for telemetry checks, so they just pulled the plug. But imagine the psychological impact. You've got air raid sirens in the Arctic, the refinery is on fire, and suddenly your phone stops working. It paralyzed the whole region. flights suspended, shopping centers evacuated.
And this forces a huge dilemma on the Russian military command, doesn't it? If Ukhta is vulnerable, what isn't?
That is the stretch strategy. Russia have a finite amount of air defense. The S-400s, the Pantsir systems, they are very powerful, but they can't be everywhere at once. So if you suddenly have to protect industrial clusters in the Komi Republic, 2,000 kilometers from the front, you have to pull those systems from somewhere else.
And that somewhere else is occupied Ukraine.
Precisely. Every Pantsir sitting in the snow in Komi is one less Pantsir protecting a tank battalion in the Donbass or a command center in Crimea. It thins the line. It's like trying to cover a king-size bed with a twin-size sheet. You pull it up to cover your chin, and your feet get cold.
I want to pivot to the economic side of this. You mentioned these single points of failure. We've been hearing a lot about fuel shortages across Russia. Is that directly linked to these very specific strikes on the distillation units?
It's a direct link. By late 2025, the data showed that roughly 38% of Russia's total refining capacity was offline.
38%. That's nearly half. That's catastrophic.
It is. For a petrostate, we saw fuel shortages pop up in 33 of Russia's 83 regions. Just think about that for a second. One of the world's largest oil producers is literally running out of gas at its own pumps. Wholesale petrol prices jumped over 50%. The price of A95 grade fuel hit all-time record highs.
And the government's response was to ban exports.
They had no choice. To keep the military machine running, and frankly, to keep the domestic population from rioting, Moscow had to ban the export of oil products.
Which cuts their revenue stream for the war.
Precisely. It's a vicious cycle. They need that oil revenue to fund the war. But the war is destroying their refineries, so they have to cut exports to save the fuel, which in turn kills the revenue, which makes it even harder to fund the war. It's economic strangulation through physics.
Let's get into the how. This is the part that, frankly, still baffles me. You have a drone flying 2,000 kilometers. Russia has some of the most dense electronic warfare, or EW, environments on the planet. They jam GPS, they jam Starlink. So how is a drone flying for 5 or 6 hours through a blizzard and hitting one specific distillation column without any satellite navigation?
This is where the technology has evolved faster than I think anyone really expected. You're absolutely right. GPS is dead in that zone. If you rely on GPS, you get jammed and you crash. So the Ukrainians taught the drones to see.
To see, as in it's literally looking at the ground.
Yes. It's a system called DSM-MAG, Digital Scene Matching Area Correlator. But in the industry, we just call it machine vision or optical navigation.
Okay, explain that to me like I'm 5. How does the robot know where it is?
Okay, so imagine you're driving to your friend's house for the first time, but your phone with the GPS dies. You don't just panic and stop. You look out the window. You see a specific river, then that church you remember from the map, then a big highway intersection. You have a mental map, right? And you compare what you see with that map to figure out where you are.
Right. Visual landmarks.
That is exactly what the drone does. It has a high-resolution camera pointed down, and it has a preloaded internal library of satellite imagery and terrain maps. It's constantly comparing its live video feed to that internal map. Okay, I see that river bend, I am here. Now I see that railway bridge, I am here.
That seems incredibly robust, because you can jam a radio signal, but you can't really jam the ground itself.
Not unless you can physically cover the entire continent of Russia in smoke. No. The drone knows where it is. It makes these systems completely immune to the standard Russian jamming systems like the Crocus 4. They can blast those frequencies all day long. The drone isn't listening, it's watching.
That is terrifyingly brilliant. And what kind of hardware are we talking about here? These aren't the little quadcopters we see dropping grenades, are they?
No, these are fixed-wing, long-range systems. We're seeing a pretty diverse fleet. The workhorse seems to be the Lyudi, which translates to fierce.
Good name.
A very apt name. They even modified it recently. They actually removed the landing gear. It launches from a dolly or a catapult and just doesn't have wheels anymore. That saves weight, reduces drag, and that's what extended its range beyond 1,300 kilometers.
I mean, it's a one-way trip anyway, right? Why carry the weight of wheels you're never going to use?
Exactly. Efficiency is everything. And then you have the real heavy hitter.
Right.
The E300 Enterprise. This thing is fascinating. It's essentially a converted civilian light sport aircraft. It's based on the Sky Ranger Ninja.
Wait, a sport plane? Like something a hobbyist would fly on the weekend?
Essentially, yes. But it's been converted into an unmanned bomber. It can carry a massive 300-kilogram payload. In some configurations, it can even drop munitions in return, but at a 3,000-kilometer range, it's a kinetic impactor. A 300-kilo warhead isn't a nuisance, That disrupts structural integrity.
That's a flying bomb truck. And I assume because it looks like a small civilian plane on radar, it might confuse the operators.
It has a very similar radar cross-section to general aviation traffic, which definitely complicates the decision-making for air defense crews. Is that a Cessna or a cruise missile? By the time they figure it out, it's often too late. And we should also mention the Shmavik.
The Shmavik. Sounds like a knockoff.
It's a playful name, but it's very serious tech. It's the Ukrainian domestic alternative to the Chinese DJI Mavic. For years, both sides relied heavily on Chinese commercial drones. Ukraine realized that reliance was a huge strategic vulnerability, so they built their own supply chain.
Speaking of supply chains, are they building all of these systems inside Ukraine? Because if I'm Russia and I know where the drone factory is,
You bomb the factory, which is why Ukraine has decentralized its production. The goal for 2026 is an astonishing 7 million drones. You just can't build that many under constant fire. So they've gone transnational, they've opened production lines in Germany, through Quantum Frontline Industries, and also in the UK.
that is a brilliant geopolitical move. The rear area of production is now literally inside NATO territory.
Exactly. Russia can't bomb a drone factory in Bavaria without triggering Article 5 and starting World War III. It secures the supply chain in a way that is, for all intents and purposes, untouchable.
But let's be realistic here. We can't paint a picture where Ukraine is just winning on every front. Russia is a massive military power. They adapt, they learn. So what is the countermove?
You're absolutely right. And underestimating Russian adaptation is a fatal mistake. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, recently used a great analogy for this. They called it the Swiss cheese effect.
I'm listening.
They argue that while Ukraine has these amazing high-tech successes, like the long-range strikes, Russia possesses these massive asymmetric advantages: manpower, artillery, glide bombs. And these are the holes in Ukraine's defense. When those holes happen to align, just like in a slice of Swiss cheese, you can get a catastrophe on the front line. Russia is still pushing very, very hard.
And what about the drone war specifically? How are they trying to stop these visual navigation drones?
They are evolving. We're seeing the creation of Rubicon units. These are specialized Russian teams whose sole job is to hunt down Ukrainian drone operators. They analyze signal patterns and use artillery to snipe the pilots themselves.
That's brutal.
It's a high-priority kill for them. And on the technology side, Russia is now deploying fiber optic drones.
Fiber optic, you mean?
Yeah.
Wired, like an old TOW missile.
Yes, but a drone, it unspools an incredibly thin fiber optic cable behind it as it flies.
That sounds almost primitive. Doesn't the wire snap or get caught on trees?
It sounds primitive, but it solves the single biggest problem in modern warfare: jamming. You physically cannot jam a light signal inside a cable. Radio waves can be scrambled. Light in a fiber cannot. This gives the operator a perfect, crystal clear, high-definition video feed right up to the moment of impact. Zero latency, zero interference.
So while Ukraine is winning the long-range game with AI vision, Russia's trying to lock down the short-range game with these unjammable wired drones.
It's a reciprocal strain. And we can't forget the winter we just came through. The winter of 2025-2026 was absolutely brutal. While Ukraine is hitting the refineries, Russia has been hammering Ukraine's thermal power plants. The attacks in December and January left parts of Kyiv and Sumy without heat and freezing temperatures.
It's a slugfest. Ukraine hits the wallet, Russia hits the heating.
And Russia is using what they call dynamic defense now. They stopped leaving their S-400s in the same field for weeks. They realized Ukrainian open-source intelligence OSINT was mapping them with satellite photos. Now the battery moves every 24 hours. That complicates mission planning for Ukraine enormously. You can't just program the drone and launch. You need real-time data on where the air defense is today.
Let's zoom out to the political landscape for a minute. We have this high-tech drone war happening against the backdrop of some very high-stakes politics. We just had the Alaska summit between Trump and Putin. There are rumors of peace talks swirling. How does blowing up a refinery in the Arctic fit into a peace negotiation?
It's what they're calling the dual-track strategy. Kyiv knows that walking into a negotiation room without leverage is basically just a surrender ceremony. So they're using these strikes to build that leverage. You have the Minister of Defense, Fedorov, focusing on what they call lethal metrics.
Lethal metrics, that sounds cold.
It is cold. War is cold. The goal is to use automation to achieve 50,000 enemy casualties a month. It's a math problem to them. The idea is if they can make the war unsustainably costly in both blood and treasure, they strengthen the hand of what's being called the peace triumvirate.
The peace triumvirate.
That's Budanov, Umirov, and Arakamiya. They're the ones handling the actual negotiations. The logic is, Fedorov brings the pain on the battlefield and to the Russian economy, which gives the triumvirate chips to play with at the negotiating table.
So it's essentially, we will stop burning down your refineries if you stop bombing our power plants.
Exactly. Both sides are escalating in order to de-escalate on their own terms. Russia hits the grid to pressure the Ukrainian population to fold. Ukraine hits the refineries to try and bankrupt the Kremlin and force Putin to reconsider the cost of continuing this war.
There has been some debate, both legally and ethically, about hitting these refineries. I've seen some pundits argue that they're civilian infrastructure. What's the verdict there?
From a military law perspective, the consensus, and certainly the Ukrainian argument, is that these are absolutely legitimate military targets. A tank cannot run without diesel. A jet cannot fly without kerosene. The refinery in Ukhta is producing the very fuel that powers the vehicles killing civilians in Kharkiv.
So it's the supply chain argument. If it powers the weapon, it becomes part of the weapon system.
Correct. It's the same logic the Allies used in World War II when they bombed the Ploesti oil fields in Romania. You cut the fuel, you stop the machine. And beyond the fuel, every single ruble Russia loses on oil exports is a ruble they can't spend on Iranian Shahed drones or North Korean artillery shells. It's resource denial.
So bringing it all back for our listeners, we've covered the geography, the tech, the economics. What is the big takeaway here? Where are we heading?
The strike on Ukhta proves that the age of distance is over. For centuries, Russia has relied on one thing above all else: its strategic depth. Napoleon, Hitler, they all ultimately failed because Russia was just too big. You march and you freeze and your supply lines just snap.
General winter and general distance.
Right, but now General Winter doesn't stop a drone with machine vision, and distance doesn't matter when you have cheap, long-range autonomous systems. Ukraine has turned Russia's greatest historical strength, its vast geography, into its greatest modern vulnerability. Because now Russia has to defend everything.
And if you have to defend everywhere?
You can't defend anywhere effectively. You are forced to spread your air defense so thin that holes inevitably open up.
That is a profound shift. The map on the wall hasn't changed, but the way we can move across it has, fundamentally.
It has. And as Ukraine ramps up to that 7 million drone target for this year, we are going to see this pressure intensify. The question isn't, can Ukraine hit it anymore? It's, how long can the Russian economy withstand these hits before something structural finally breaks?
And one final thought for you to chew on. We talked about production moving to Germany and the UK. We are literally watching the birth of a transnational defense industry that's born from war, but is being built for the future of European security.
The innovations happening in Kyiv garages today, the AI targeting, the anti-jamming tech, these are going to define NATO doctrine for the next 20 years. We are watching the future of warfare being written in real time.
A future where the front line is, quite literally, everywhere. You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your trusted source for timely, in-depth military and defense analysis. We'll see you next time. Keep supporting us so we can continue bringing you the latest developments from Ukraine and around the world.